Hey, everybody, today we're delving into the phrase break the bank. And now, this has its origins in gambling and banking dating back to the 19th century. The term often associated was with casinos, particularly context of games like roulette and poker. In the early days of gambling establishments, the term bank referred to the total amount of money that the casino had available for payouts per table. They acted like their own little casinos, like each one of them individually. It's not like today where all the tables kind of funnel into one big monolith account like they have in like Vegas. Back then, every day the casino would start a procession of employees carrying these big, heavy chests out to each one of the gambling tables. This was the table's designated bank. And the goal was for the players to win the money from this bank. If the player kept winning large amounts and this reserve was depleted enough that they couldn't pay out the winnings, play at the table was suspended and the player was said to have broken the bank. After this, extra funds would be brought out from the casino's vaults, but not before a ceremony that was just absolutely genius. It was devised by Francois Blanc. He was the owner of the casino back then. I just love that name, Francois Blanc. It was basically a solemn ceremony where consisting of a black cloth that was brought out by the employees and then draped over the table. Now, this kind of symbolized like the table had died and they were mourning the loss of the vast amounts of money that it once had. This was his way of turning lemons into lemonade, and this is why I think it was so genius. The casino had lost a bunch of money, and they definitely don't want to do that. But in doing this and having the other gamblers watch them do it, gave them the feeling that they could break the bank too, making them gamble more and at higher dollar bets. Genius. Think of all those loud bells and sirens and lights that go off when someone hits it big in the Vegas slots. This does exactly the same thing to people now as the black cloth did to people back then. In 1881, that's exactly what happened, and for the first time ever, enter Joseph Jagger. This guy. I find this guy's story so interesting. I'm going to take a hot minute to fill you in on his backstory because it is just bananas. So Joseph was a textile worker as he grew up, and he eventually worked his way up the ranks from working on machines and to running them to eventually opening up his own textile business. Unfortunately, things happened in the world, and he ended up going bankrupt and had a mountain of debts. Now, he was summoned to the court and was looking at most likely that he was going to be sentenced to a debtor's prison, which was no picnic back then. This is where the story gets incredibly fascinating for me because his plan to take his son and his nephew to Monte Carlo to make his fortune in gambling was his ticket out of there. That was the way that he had decided that, hey, this is the way I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this my thing. You know, imagine that happening today. People would be like, you're nutso. But he asked his friends and family for the money and they gave it to him. And off he went. He went to Monte Carlo to make his fortune. So he makes his way to the casinos and he has to even hire a suit to even get in there because they have dress codes and he doesn't even have enough money to have a nice enough suit to get into these places. That's what we're talking about. How ridiculous this whole thing is. Once inside, he puts his knowledge of growing up in a textile business to work. He knew that there was no way at that time to produce a perfectly true wheel or circle, and that there was always going to be inconsistencies and one spot on that wheel that would be not perfectly round and cause things to happen. Now, you can get away with things not being perfectly round in most anything, but when it comes to gambling, that means that the roulette wheel is going to land on certain numbers more often than others. And what he did is that his nephew, and his son record all the winning numbers on the various roulette tables in the casino for about a month. Back in the place that they were staying, they compiled all these numbers and which table it belonged to and found each table's weaknesses. It was time to put his plan into motion. He would go to these tables and he would place bets on these numbers. And just as he had found out with all the research, the ball landed more often than not on the numbers that he was putting his bet on. After a couple of days, the casino got wind of his winnings and they thought he was cheating, but they could not figure out how. So in order to mess him up, they lifted all the roulette wheels and switched them around to different tables. Basically, they were just mixing them up in just an unsure attempt to try to figure out how this guy was making all this money. It wasn't the last thing that they tried, but it was definitely a start. But Joseph came back and he started gambling again, and he realized, hey, my strategy isn't working anymore. Something's happened. It was at this point he noticed a very small scratch on the wheel that he was playing with or playing at, and he noticed that wasn't there before. He's really sharp. It's then he realized they had switched the wheels. He adjusted his play, went to a table where he thought he knew which wheel it was, and started winning again. This was the last day, basically, of the bulk of his winnings because he did go back and try again. But what the casino finally found out how to thwart him was to take up the numbers and move them around. So it put him in the opposite direction. So if the 18 was on one side one day, it would now be on the 5, but the wheel itself would stay the same, but the numbers would be moved. In doing so, there was absolutely no way that he could win like he had before without doing the month-long research that he had done to actually get all that information. And he knew that they were probably still going to keep doing this, so he was probably done. So he lost a bit of his winnings until realizing this. Knowing that he had probably been outplayed by the casino at this point, he stopped gambling and decided to go home. So what did he win? Well, he won 80,000 pounds, British pounds, in that time. Today's value, that would just be shy of about 12 million pounds in today's money. And now if you convert that to US dollars, that's about $15 million. He had done it. This crazy man. Can you imagine this now? Sounds like a movie that Zach Galifianakis would do. In fact, there's a very large resemblance between the two. Check it out. Now, this seems like Joseph Jagger was the first person to actually break the bank, but it wasn't publicized because the casino had thought that he had not won it legitimately, and that he had actually exploited something that they had wrong, something that was not good with them. So they definitely did not want to publicize that. They would have to wait about 10 years later until a man named Charlie Wells did the same exact thing and broke the bank, but they had absolutely no way of knowing how he did it. So it may have been just a string of really good luck, but the guy had a kind of a fraudster past and definitely a fraudster history going forward, that they could never prove it. So they advertised the heck out of him so that make it look like the everyday man could come and win all these great winnings from them. Side note, I'm going to do one of these on Charlie as well, because after reading about his history, I just love this. One thing leads to another. He was fascinating as well. So I'll do one of these later on him. And there you have it. The history on breaking the bank. And the gentleman who was the actual first to have done it. So being the first, you may have wondered whatever happened to good old Joseph Jagger. Well, he is not one really to flaunt his wealth. And in fact, he maintained most of it when he went back. And the only real big purchases that he did was that he bought the house that he was living in after he had to declare bankruptcy, bought the ones on either side of it for his immediate family. And then he did buy 30 other homes to gift to other people, friends and family. He never sought fame or glory, which endears him to me, to be honest. I just think it's a very sensible way of going about doing it. He lost his home when he went bankrupt, and he was basically giving these people someplace to live, which is, the greatest security that someone can give somebody. It's a great gift. I love this guy. And if you're wondering about that last name of his, Jagger, it is rumored that he is a distant relative of Mick Jagger. Although in all the research that I went through, it never got past the term, it has been rumored that. So take it for what it's worth. He may be related, may not be. It's worth also noting that his great-great niece named Anne Fletcher wrote a great book about him called From the Mill to Monte Carlo. If you like this story and you want to know a whole lot more about it and fill in all the blanks that I missed, it's definitely worth a read. So now, over time, the term break the bank has expanded beyond the realm of gambling and now used more broadly to describe any situation where someone achieves extraordinary level of success or surpasses the expected limits. Often it's in the context of finance or business. The phrase has become a metaphor of exceeding expectations and achieving remarkable outcomes. So I hope you really enjoyed this. And if you did, make sure you like and follow me. And I'll be sure to have more of these in the future. Take care. Bye.